Well, good evening, everyone. We should get started. I think the lights are going to turn out in a minute, and we need to turn them. See if that. How's that? Maybe if I stand over here. All right. So welcome, everyone. My name is John Brown. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape, and this is day one of our winter block week. For those of you that are guests, you may not be aware, but twice a year we close down our regular class curriculum, and we invite a bunch of super interesting people to come to our school for a week to teach our students about something new and different, either going into a topic in great depth or doing something totally different as an introduction. It's been a part of our school from the beginning, and it's a key part of our curriculum. And in a city where we're not Toronto and we're not New York, we're not London, we don't have practitioners sort of regularly crossing through here. It's a great way for us to be able to bring some diversity of viewpoint, some diversity of background, and diversity of talent into our school to the benefit of our students. All of our students within the MR program are take a block week elective during the fall and the winter term, and so it's quite a hub of activity. And we have a series of courses happening this week with 3 signature courses: the Gillmor lectureship, the Taylor lectureship, and the Somerville lectureship, which Jason will speak about in a couple of minutes. I wanted to note that we are meeting this evening on the lands of the people, the traditional lands of the people of Treaty 7, and that we are within 300 meters of the traditional, the first meeting place of people in this region, which was the crossing of the meeting of the Bow and the Elbow River, and that we are meeting in the former public library, which, when the building was opened 6 years ago to us as the City Building Design Lab with a smudge, the Indigenous elders said that this had good energy because it was always a place where everybody was invited to come and could come in and use the washroom, get a grab, get warmed up, read a book, read a magazine. So we're trying to keep that tradition alive by having events like this as often as possible. So you feel free to use the washroom, read a book, do whatever you would like, even in spite of the trying times that we all find ourselves with our downtowns and so much of our public realm under a certain amount of threat. But to go back to the acknowledgement, the Treaty 7 comprises the Pagane, the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is the Siksika, the Pikane, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Dakota, which includes the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Goodstern Stoney First Nations, and the Calgary is home to Métis Region 5 and 6. So we are here for the opening events, 2 lectures for our block week. On Wednesday night, we will have another event like this, the Somerville Lectureship, with Johanna Herme, a Governor General Award-winning architect from Winnipeg. And on Friday, we're going to celebrate the end of block week with a bang-up winter 2024 block party, which should be a whole lot of fun. On March 13th, David Malda will join us from Seattle. He's the key design lead at GGN. And on April the 3rd, we will have Gabriela Carrillo, a Mexican architect and partner of the practice Taller Roca and Carrillo. It's now my pleasure to introduce Associate Dean Jason Johnson to introduce our speakers for this evening. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. So our first speaker tonight is our Gillmor lecturer. The Gillmor lecture is named in honor of Douglas Gillmor. Douglas was the founding director of the architecture program and one of the pivotal members in the founding of SAPL, formerly the Faculty of Environmental Design. Professor Gillmor was known as a compassionate and studio teacher, and he shaped generations of practitioners here in the city of Brea. Our speaker for this lectureship will be Ana de Brea. Known Ana for quite a bit of time, but that's the least important part of her CV, so I'll go over the other stuff. So Ana is a professor, practitioner, artist, and critical observer of architecture and design. She was among the founders of Waterloo 35 or 35 in Buenos Aires, Museum of Modern Art, and Grupo Eve in Rosario. Both well-known groups for the discussion of architecture in the territories of South America. Ana has worked for more than 15 years as a columnist and chief editor of the Architecture and Design insert into the most important international newspapers in the Spanish language, in Clarín and El Cronista. She's taught at universities in Argentina and joined Ball State University in 2001, where a bit later I met her. There's a bunch of things here that we've got out to you in your insert. That you can catch up on the rest of her CV. I don't want to eat up any of her time. And I think the thing that I would say about Ana is she's passionate about design and really about getting students to become passionate about design as well. And I think that shows through both in the way that she engages the topic and the students themselves. And she's a good sort of listener and kind of pusher of buttons for students to put their thoughts into action. So if you would please join me in welcoming Ana de Brea.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you all for being here. I like to hear that I motivate students. That's one of my goals. I hope I will do that with the students here. I had a nice conversation today with them, and they are already thinking conceptually about a different place in the world, because the project is sited in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, so it's great. So I apologize in advance if something happens here, because I am a Mac person and I have difficulties. But I brought a few things that I consider very important after COVID. Essentially, I published a book recently right before COVID, and it's my first book in the English language. I always wrote in Spanish before that. So that gave me the opportunity to visit different parts of the world. And then suddenly the COVID was a big break, a big stop for all of us. And I, consider I've been by yourself in your place, it was a good time for me to think about architecture in a different way. I was thinking of 4,000 million people living inside of a box at that moment. And, I was trying to imagine what the cities were, right? Without people on the streets and sharing and exchanging. So I started reading more. I consider myself a well reader. I had to be, because in my time, there wasn't any possibility to get internet. So it didn't exist. So I was thinking of the importance of being awake. I think now I consider would be my best dream, to really open my eyes and to see what is going on in the world and how we as designers can help people live a little better. So I brought this image from Doug Aiken. You know, I consider he's one of the very interesting writers today that talks about this, talks about us being sleepwalkers, right, in our own bubble, right, listening to our own music, being like what happened to me, being in my world, my Mac world, and not being able to change that. So the notion of physicality was, again, for me, something to question and to look, you know, deeper at it. So this is a fragment from an interview that it was a conversation in between Bernard Schumi when he was living in Colombia, and the Toshiko Mori. She was at the same time that he was living, she was getting, you know, being the head at Harvard. So that was a very interesting conversation published in Metropolis, the magazine, and I extracted this paragraph that she mentions, you know, when they were asked, how do you see your role as educator? She mentions the notion of invisible. Education is invisible. You can have a degree, that doesn't mean I drive, that doesn't mean that I do it well. So, you know, you can have the credentials, but really what matters is not really in that, right, in those credentials. So to me, you know, the notion of motivating, of being awake, of being happy about what we do is very important. Life is too short. So there is no rehearsal, is this one. So other, you know, these are all images with some questions that, you know, I selected for today. This is Aaron Betsky, and he's asking, he's an architect in one of his articles, right? The first sentence is this one. He's an architect more than just somebody who gets buildings built. So being from him, you know, coming from him, it was very interesting to me to read, you know, I have all his books, I have to say, and he's talking about the question of beauty in architecture, apart from the construction. So I think that to think about who is an architect in today's society is very important, and to continue working. Another one that was a big source in my career in architecture, it was Jorge Luis Borges. Probably most of you know about him, who he was. And this sentence that is the 40 word of the last door, one of his books, is very singular to me because he talks about the summatory of things, you know, who you are with, what you produce, what you question, what you do not question. So I think that is what appears in our body, in our face. This is another one. I will try to make it, right? This is one of the most, I was trying to introduce this to you if you do not know. This is one of the most considered for the ones that talk about sustainability, one of the most sustainable projects in the world. This is located in Spain, and the translation is Rasca Infiernos in English, you know, skyscrapers. You know, this is going down because the house doesn't have any physicality. It is all underground. And it became the house of the architect, Fernando Higueras, until he died. It has everything, is perfect, you know, it has cross ventilation, light, when it doesn't have not even one window, right? It has just an opening in the ceiling. He enters, like you do what you imagine you would be doing, going, visiting a cavern, right? So I thought that that was very interesting because it's a piece of architecture that doesn't really exist, right, as a building, right? One other article was mentioning also the Ground Zero proposal in New York that is considered one of the most interesting conceptual architecture projects, and there is no building either. Is in fact is a hole that is never be filled, right? So this was really very interesting because I started thinking of the notion of go back here. This. Perfect. Right. Go again. This is an image of Clorindo Testa. Clorindo Testa was one of the most important, he was architects from all over South America. He was born in Italy, but he did his entire career in Argentina. He, of course, did several projects around the world. This is him when he was 5 or 6 years old. And this is a drawing that he did when he was asked to draw a house, the typical thing that we all do. And he did 2 different facades. So to me was, he was one of my mentors in my career. In fact, my first book is a conversation where he is one of the people that are talking about architecture. And it was really interesting to me to, when he showed me this image and he told me, you need to turn the corner. It's not just a one direct vision. So we need to go around and to see if it's possible 360 degrees. So I couldn't believe that he was 6 years old. He was already thinking that the house could have 2 different facades, right? This is when he was celebrating his, I think that the country was celebrating his 60th, anniversary. So he did this that was the cover of the brochure, like 50 years later. This is another thinker. I don't make a lot of differences between thinkers and architects. So this is Joaquin Torres Garcia, an artist that he was from Uruguay, but he worked with Gaudí in Spain and different architects also, but his work by itself is amazing. And he allowed me to think about that we decide what we need to do, what we want to, how we want to see things. He was, this is one of the most popular, I would say, images by him. He was an artist, he did sculptures also, 3-dimensional pieces. But this is a drawing where what he does is, of course, inverted the map of South America, leaving the equator where it was and putting the map in the north of the Americas, right? So he says that my north is the south. So that was really interesting to me. It's another convention that was being questioned or observed. And I really appreciate this work. Sincerely, it's amazing how helped me understand that there is more than one way of doing right things, that it depends on us, right? So, well, this is it. There will be a series of images that talk about this subject that I've been doing it with students in different seminars or studio classes, conceptualizing these ideas, how you go around, if it's possible, all the way around this notion that there is no immortal, we hope, north and the south as a division that is just geography, or there is no front and back anymore. More than any other art, and I consider architecture is an art, so shapes our environment, right? So, but it's not the same. The world doesn't stop. You know, we put 4,000 million people inside of their houses. So, I think that reading philosophy, understanding what is going around, it's important for us to get motivated to continue working on something. Some like musicians, they look for all the keys are important. It's not just one. So I always, of course, I question architecture even when I had long years, in Wisconsin and some books written also. This is talking about the notion of physicality. I found this is a portion of the paper that is talking about the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe. And, of course, that's the reference that it was built in 1929, but was demolished for a while, after 9 months. There is no picture in color. So the color that we see in the Barcelona Pavilion is not, confirmed. It doesn't really, there is nothing that can be the evidence that those were the colors. And we buy that, right? So we think we mentioned the Barcelona Pavilion, we mentioned Mies van der Rohe, but this was done by De Solá Morales, an architect from Spain, that he rebuilt the pavilion. So this is again, right? So we are pondering, and this is one of the most, I would say, one of the paradigms in architecture, at least in modern movement, right? And we talk about something that doesn't exist anymore, right? That is the reconstruction of that truth, if there was any. And so I find that interesting, right? To me, it's going to the point, right? To me, it's questioning, what we are really seeing. We talk about buildings, we tend to equal buildings and architecture, but not all the buildings are architecture, right? Maybe architecture includes also buildings. This is another piece that I selected under the same topic, that this is in Indiana by Philip Johnson. This is the roofless church where there is no building. The sky is, is the limit. And I think I find it very interesting, not only the glass house that he gave us the opportunity to think about space that can be private but transparent, but also, he put all the efforts and this piece created, right? And there is a limit that everybody is at the same level, right? There is no hierarchy on the ground. And everybody has the same limit, that is the sky. I thought that, that was super interesting. I visited a couple of times, and it's not that well known, right? We don't see a building here. But we see more than just building. This is a book published, and these are some of this is just one book that has titles in the front and in the back cover. And I find these very interesting hashtags that talking about architecture today. This is a book that was published about like 2 years ago, 3. And they talk about activism, our collective work, control, multiplicity, all these, very powerful concepts, and written by different type of architects also that they were invited to give their interpretation of things. This is a very recent, I got it in Canada, in fact, in the architecture, the CCA, right? And I found that this is Alvaro Siza from Portugal, you know, Pritzker Prize, one of the very first Pritzker Prizes. And the title of the book is Imagine the Evident. So I thought that also works in that way, you know, what we see, what is real, right? In this world that is the post-truth, is very, right, that we like everything that is online sometimes, right, with no evidence. And this is one that the student bought for me because I wasn't really very clear about artificial intelligence. And I thought, wow, a book that I do not know about, and the student is bringing that to me. You know, the title is Artificial View, right? So I find interesting, you know, the recent book, the one you saw, the title is Latin American, right, architecture. It's a series of projects and theories around all the territory of Latin America. But I also invited people from Europe that never been to South America but did, or Latin America but did projects there. Some Latin American architects that are working in other parts of the world and not just in the territory, because I believe that architecture shouldn't be qualified. One of the very sad things I would say is that immediately when I moved to Germany, I was the Latin person. And I never consider myself Latin, not because I do not want to be. It's just my name was Gordana, right? Just being me to add. So we tend to qualify architecture, the good design, the bad architecture. And to me, architecture should be the qualifier, not qualifying architecture. So the book talks about that question. Different images that I brought, you know, this is Kenohara and the book one that doesn't have any word, but just all the pages are 500 pages, 500 faces that he did research. This is like a phone book of faces. This is time ago, right, in the 60s. And, you know, we all have, generally speaking, right, our faces are composed by the same elements, right? There are two eyes, one nose, mouth, we know, people, right? But they are all different. They have their own singularity. And he was just taking the pictures. So you see the book is an amazing book. And the size of the book is the size, it's a full size, it's a full scale of the face. So it's very singular and very interesting to look at. This is Sarka Kadig, right? One of the, I admire her work. She talks about the, you know, the drawings that my drawings are the help. They are not the building. I like to share this for in my studios or in any class I teach, even if they are seminars, because they talk about the idea of about. That nothing is so defined, is, you know, so my drawings, they are my help. They are not the building, they are about the building, right? What is this situation, right? So what I am producing. So, and for that, you need to look at how people live today, right? How we get together, how we celebrate, how people do it differently. I was mentioning this morning in the class, right, in our conversation, I was saying that when I moved to the US from Germany, everybody was inviting me to go to dinner or lunch. I was a visiting professor. I was very lucky. They treated me very nicely. But they always wanted me to go to Mexican restaurant. So one day I asked the question, "Oh, you speak Spanish?" I said, so I couldn't, I mean, it was a nice gesture from them, but even Mexican food is not my cup of tea food, right? So instead of asking me, and I swear to God, they were super great. They were trying to make me feel comfortable and happy. But it was really very, now we laugh when remember, when we talk about these things. But it was really very interesting that we put things in drawers, right? Our, the Spanish that is spoken in Mexico is not really, I don't even speak Spanish. In Argentina, people do not speak Spanish. We need to, right, like English from England, right? English from the US, American English. So everything has a subtle difference. Nothing is just one way. Talking about the notion of physicality, this is a visit that we did time ago when there was the ground zero proposal, the competition was going around, and this is, we could visit with a group of students. We were doing a field week, and we went to New York and we visited, this is Rafael Vignoli, but the work is done by Think Group, integrated by Chiqueruban, Rafael Vignoli, and others. And they started talking to us, in relationship. That was, let's say the competition was March or February 2003, and this was like May, same year. So they started talking to us, thinking, explaining to us how they got here. And they started with two L's, right? Volumes in the shape of an L, two of them like framing the towers that were not there. And they realized after a while that when they were working on this idea, right, of these two L's, one in front of the other, right, and symbolizing here was, the towers were here. So one of the assistants was saying, hey, we are framing the absence. We are framing, you frame something that is important for you, a picture of your mother, or, and say, we are framing this event, we are framing the absence of these towers that is a result of a horrible event, right? So they started to say, why instead of framing it, why we do not construct, right, the absence? And they came up with this idea of this, you get to read the two towers there. These are really, they did more than 70 models. These are one of the very, because they didn't have the final one at that moment. So, and they were explaining, I thought that it was a great conversation for me, for the students that were there, here in this, about constructing the absence, right? And that is what they wanted to communicate, right? The absence of the towers. This is an image that I found in online. I don't know the author, but I think that I would, like to mention the author, but I have no idea. These things that we do now that, right, they fly from one to another. And I thought this is fabulous. This was at the time of COVID, right? That we do that. We don't connect, right? So we don't touch. That was particularly because we needed to, but we do that again, right? So we communicate via Zoom. The language is being reconsidered because the verb to be doesn't mean the same thing now. And they are trying to think about that because for the future, right? So, so these are generally the points that I discuss in any class that I teach or any conversation I am part of, or just listening to someone and trying to relate to what is interesting to me in different events. I am really passionate. That's something that is sometimes is used in a very non-important way, we use passion for something that just we're passionate about ice cream or something. I am really passionate about understanding the world where I am part of, and I think I try to do the best I can, right, to understand it better. And because of my role as an academic, I like to be able to communicate. So I think that the notion of recording is very important in our world, in the architecture world. So I am seeing, I also, of course, I use all the digital agoras that I can, and these are work, done by an artist, Tony Clark, that I find interesting, that we are in that regard, right? We have the same objectives to build, and in my artwork, it is art. So in my other work that is not architecture, I always try to use materials that I find. So I try not to, I do it with the students. We put a limit very simple, like $10 or something, really, right? Just to put a limit. This is Costa Rica, a trip that I did years ago. And I was looking, at this guy that was producing volumes, right? Physical forms with what he had, right? I still have, of course, I bought the cat, right? And I had it, and this is like 10 years old and it's still there. And we use it when we want to. And this guy was really very, right, this notion of doing things really carefully, looking at really, it's very difficult today, at least for me, right, for my own. It's very difficult. We have a lot of things to look at. These are also some images that I took in trips to also with the students. Some of them are from museums also. I brought just a few, just thinking of this idea that the first architecture is the skin and maybe the clothing is the second one. And also, how tools, right, to create what you want to, the notion. This is Alejandro Aravena, right?
Sorry, but the microphone.
Yes, I don't know how it works. It's not. Now, go? Perfect, thank you. So as you see, this is, on the right, you have the original one, someone that thought that a piece, right, of cotton or a piece of fabric would help him feel more comfortable when seated. And this is, to me, I appreciate Alejandro Arena's work in architecture, but I think that this is a commercialization of an idea, right? So he did it for Vitra, and you can buy it now. That is called the bent chair, right? And it's a translation of that guy, right? That thought of something that didn't have four legs, right? Or one or two didn't have, right? It wasn't about the ground, but it was the idea of, being comfortable. What motivated this indigenous to create that piece, right? So this is, I weave, I knit, I crochet, I do, of course, garments. I think that most people, at least I was saying this morning, one or two people in each family at least in South America knows how to do this. Money is not a big thing there. So you need to learn how to produce your own things. And the fashions are always there. But I wanted to go deeper and bigger in that. So I started, this is a competition not a competition, an exhibition in the Netherlands that is going on, that was on. And we made rope with leftover materials. I was in the US, another person was in Argentina doing it, and another one in the Netherlands. And we created, the pole was for a piece of furniture that could be used for more than one people at a time. So we did this come up. I remember, the other two people that work in this project too. They were all the time asking me. I was the older, and it was supposed to be, I was supposed to know. And they were saying, "Are you sure that this is not going to?" Right? And when we saw the kids, giving the shoes, you sit here and jumping and stretching, it was a big lesson for us, but it was really, good. These are other pieces that also with the students, together with the students, everything by hand, everything leftover materials, very ephemeral constructions sometimes, but thinking of the point, thinking of the function, thinking of how we can make it without money. So these are all, the packaging we have been collecting, and so this is also when we started learning about how the brain, right, works. This is all filled with plastic. We went to ask for plastic. Everybody was giving us, millions of plastic bags that they had leftovers in their homes. So this is the same piece tested with light, and there's still a solid piece, so it is the same thing, how you stretch it and how it works differently. Vertically, these are also all the tags. This is just a fragment when I didn't want to bring everything. So these are the tags that when you buy any piece of garment or anything, so it has all the explanation, and generally all that goes to the trash, right? So we were attaching this, and we did a big piece that was covering space. This is more, that I will go really fast. Two projects, more traditional architecture, but also I think that is not more traditional because they are houses, but not really traditional in the way that right here is the side, right? Bring your UFO, put it there, right? So this was the black thing, everything that is black was already construction. The red was also leading to a different house. And we needed I had to work this one that is the blue one. And that was a corridor. Here is a corridor where you access every space. So this was here is the other one. This one is the first level, the other one was the second. So, and we did some drawings, I did some drawings. And this was really interesting because I was in the US, and these pieces was being built in Buenos Aires. So there was a lot of conversations with the workers, right? And the people, the clients, so not Zoom at that moment, but be it online or over the phone. And we needed to send, right, different kind of drawings, and they were taking different type of pictures, sending those to me, and I traveled, of course, during the process. But I thought it was the first time I was working with metal, so it was the first time I was, it was something new for me. It was in the middle of this garden, this green, so I wanted to make sure that this was for a musician. The house was going to be for the musician, not really a lot of money. I would say almost nothing, because the whole thing was $30,000. So here is, some of the projects, and any type, right? So of drawing, so we did, there was an existing, stairs, because this was a division of a house that was divided in 4 or 5 parts, I don't remember exactly. And we got, these stairs that we didn't have the first two because they didn't exist, so, and I wanted to go, to design something different, so these are movable pieces, so you can use them as tools or, right, or. So I promise I have better pictures, but, so we did everything, right, so we designed the sink also, and everything we could do, we did it because we wanted to make it for him. This was, I take, some details in every piece that I do. This is, didn't want these stairs, detach, right, the wall, that was the existing wall, like a dialogue with the past. So I made it, right? When you are a woman and you are, thank you. When you are a woman and you are an architect, many times you are being questioned. I don't know if it's just me, but are you sure that we can do this? And I said, I'm not, but let's try to think about doing it, right? And I thought that was really good. So it was really, and this is at the end, I said, why not a small terrace there with no limits? So we created kind of a bar for him. He likes to meet with his friends and a seat as a border for, as a limit. Very small space. I was planning on showing another one, but this is in the middle, and I think it's a good ending for the top. This is the Museum of Modern Art in Indianapolis, like 2006. And I was, visiting, you can visit the museum and going through. And I saw this person, with one image of the real piece in the past. And how she was planning to get it done in the future when it is finished. And she was working, I was like an hour there, and she never turned. She was really going to, that piece and being so careful about what she was doing. And I remember the quote by Corbu that said, let's put a foot in the past for inspiration, right? But the other one in the future. I think it's a good thing to end it here. Thank you again.
So we have time for a few questions while Isabel's setting up. So, Anna, if you want to. I'll take.
In this room, okay. Yeah.
Isabel.
No problem.
I don't know, someone has a question?
I was over here.
So I'll start. One of the things I wanted to ask is maybe a comment on how you treat the relationship between not just yourself and students, but yourself and architects when you're having a conversation about design, because my experience is you're quite honest with people, right? And so maybe just for the benefit of students and maybe us as well, kind of how you treat those conversations where you're both going to be quite honest with each other about a kind of critique between two people.
It's difficult to answer that question, right? I think that one thing that helps me always is the art, is the explorations I do outside of the architecture, that I also call them architecture anyways. Sincerely, I think that we have to be honest, right? I mean, so it's difficult sometimes because a person, we are still in 2024, we are still discussing some things that are very old. So I'm not sure how I discuss. I'm sure I do it with honesty. Sometimes even, in looking for being, looking for justice, we are very unfair sometimes, right? It's difficult when we criticize work in the school and we think differently. That is what you were referring to. So maybe that's, I try to be honest, but also a nice person, right? To not tell the others. To me, I consider the first one was about being awake. It's very important. Because sometimes we assume we are, right? And sometimes, when I saw that image of Florindo Testa with the house in the two facades, I thought, wow, right? That's very important to turn the corner. And sometimes I need to learn how other people do things. To me, being professional was always, I always saw that as being something really difficult to get. So maybe that was my starting point with the art, because to me, to verify some things with architecture, in architecture terms, took a long time, right? To, just to build a house for different reasons, or something very simple, it takes time, and then you need to digest that work, and then you get to interpret. So it helped many times, given examples of my explorations outside of the traditional architecture world. It helped me communicate to others how I think or how things can be different. And knowing that we do not know, I think it's a wonderful starting point. To not know, right? To change things because we do not know.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. We're gonna try to go back here while we're doing that. Our next speaker is our Taylor lecturer. So the Taylor lecture is named in honor of Dale Taylor, who's in the flesh here somewhere. There, I see it back there. One of the things, it was actually the first thing I did when I came here was to be assigned inaugural Dale Taylor lecturer, to invite somebody to come and speak to students, and someone that would reflect Dale's interest in both supporting and encouraging emerging professionals, but with a real focus on sort of materiality and making things at all scales. And so over the last, I guess, 15 years now, that I've been off and on selecting people to do this workshop, it's been really important to both have a conversation with Dale afterwards about his thoughts of what he's looking at, but also just to bring in people who contribute to the culture of sort of thinking through making at the school. So this year, I'm pleased to welcome Isabel Ochoa. Isabel is an architectural designer, researcher, and adjunct faculty member at the University of Waterloo, where she currently teaches design studio, digital fabrication, and visual and digital media courses. Isabel is a co-founder of OCH Works in collaboration with James Clark Hicks, who's here as well, helping with this workshop. They're an architectural design and research collaborative operating at the intersection of architecture, material computation, and fine craft. Their practice investigates the contemporary building methods and how they can be challenged by attuning emerging technologies to material behaviors. Their current research is exploring how computational tools generate materially responsive engagements between ceramics and light, Her lecture is titled Coded Light, Digital Explorations in the Continuum of Ceramic Craft. She could welcome Isabel.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, and thanks to some of the students here from my block reading course for a very positive start to the week. So yeah, I'm Isabel. I'm an adjunct instructor at the University of Waterloo. I also have a research practice called OCH Works that looks at the integration of digital craft in contemporary ceramic fabrication processes. With myself and my partner, James, who is here as well, co-teaching the block course with me. And so both of us are trained as architects, but we're also ceramicists. And so what we're primarily exploring in our practice is how our knowledge of material behavior can inform the way we integrate digital tools into physical ways of making. So the talk is going to be structured into 6 brief parts. In the first part of the conversation, I'll go over how all of this fits into the context of the world of architecture, but also the world of ceramics. Then I'll go through a couple of current or recent projects. And then I'll share with you at the end of the talk some of the stuff that we're going to be doing as part of the Taylor seminar course. But first, I want to start the conversation by speaking to the materials that we're working with as part of our practice. And we are specifically working with high fired clays. And so fired clays are actually considered the first human engineered material. A really, really long time ago, people figured out that by basically sticking mud into a hot fire, that would change the material's physical and chemical makeup to give it some pretty special qualities. And that process is now called firing. So because of this, ceramics have 2 types of properties. They have what are called fired ceramic traits and working properties. And so it's the firing process that gives ceramics really desirable characteristics when it comes to applications in architecture in the built environment. So the first thing that comes to my mind is ceramics are impermeable to water. They have incredible compressive strength, like we're seeing in the example of this project here. But some of the fired ceramic traits that we've become very excited about working with in our practice are that some types of clay, when you fire them to extremely high temperatures, they become translucent. And the fact that clays can take on any number of finish appearances when they're fired. And that makes them really interesting to reflect or scatter light off of. But it's really the working properties of clay that allow us to mold it into anything we want. Vessels, ovens, musical instruments, building envelope components. It's the way the material behaves in this very plastic state that allow us to shape it into super complex geometries. So as we saw before, fired ceramic is strong, rigid, it's durable. Wet clay, because it's plastic, is able to support these complex forms. And like you're seeing here, if something doesn't work out, you can introduce water into it and start all over again. So it's a hyper-sustainable material to work with, and it's also completely organic. But like we're seeing here, that amazing plasticity and workability comes at the expense of instability. And so structural collapse and plastic deformation are a huge part of working with wet clay. So for thousands of years, human beings have figured out really clever ways of working with this material. And so the umbrella term for shaping wet clay is called wet processing. It doesn't really matter if you're referring to working with it with your hands, sculpting it, or throwing it, or if you're processing it through a machine, it's all called wet processing. And so things like coiling, slip casting, wheel throwing, clay 3D printing, these are all forms of wet processing. But I want to shift the conversation for a second away from the world of kind of studio pottery or studio ceramics and talk about all this in the context of building construction. And so things like slump molding, plastic pressing, and slip casting, those are all really common techniques for making architectural ceramic systems. And the key difference between these things and clay 3D printing is the lack of form work. So in all of these methodologies of wet processing that you're seeing here, a form work or a mold is used to stabilize the material when you're handling it, right? And so that ensures that the material is not going to have too many formal inconsistencies between pieces. It's also going to ensure that nothing structurally collapses during that unstable wet processing. And it's probably because it's super economic, right? So you can make one mold and produce hundreds or even thousands of components. It's also worthwhile noting that mold making itself is quite an expensive process. And so sometimes in order to offset the cost of making one very expensive mold, you need to produce 100 or 1,000 units. And all of that has resulted in systems and built environments that are characterized by symmetry and redundancy. So when we think of like the first example that comes to mind when we talk about architectural ceramic assemblies, we think of repeating bricks for tiles in walls that are identical in elevation and section. So the need for, or the desire for, customization is often at odds with the desire for an economic and efficient process that leads to component redundancy. So what we're asking ourselves in our work through our research practice is, how does 3D printing sort of fit into the continuum of ceramic craft and all of these building traditions? What can it offer us that other forms of craft cannot? And if something can be done more easily or more efficiently with another method of making, is it really worth 3D printing? And so this leads to the question of what makes 3D printing absolutely essential as a process in any given project. And so the title of this talk was called Coded Light. So you'll see that a very pervasive thread in our work is light modulation. And our research looks at how we can develop customized ways of altering light scattering behavior that are not easily reproduced through alternative fabrication processes. And so we're specifically working with a process that other researchers often refer to as functionally graded additive manufacturing. And all that really means is mapping certain performance attributes over the volume of a particular object. And so in our case, we're using 3D printing to modulate light across the volume of these ceramic screens. Of course, there's a very long tradition of doing this in architecture already. So the most notable examples that come to mind for me are of early Indo-Islamic construction, where we see jolly walls being used to filter daylight. And this type of technique in the world of ceramics is called open work. So it's the technique of creating porosity in a ceramic section. So this is typically achieved using methods like hand building or carving. I think these examples, or casting. And these things are essentially just geometric tessellations that are incorporated into building systems as ornament. The thing to note here is that these methods of making typically yield continuous openings in the wall section. A more modern version of this are Erwin Hauer's continuous screens that were developed in the 1950s and 60s by casting concrete, hydrostone, and limestone. And although there is more sectional variation in the individual units, all of the units in Hauer systems are identical. And so you're getting the same kind of light modulating effect across the entire volume of these screens. So in our research, we're working with high-fired ceramics like porcelain, terracotta, earthenware, and stoneware. And we're trying to expand on these building traditions of using open-work ceramics to filter light. So by instead using 3D printing as a way of creating variable sections within these ceramic screens. And I'll kind of get into the weeds of this in a second. So all of this is part of a project called Grading Light. That's basically our ongoing body of work. We had the opportunity of displaying this work over the summer at the Canadian Plate and Glass Gallery as part of a solo exhibition there. And with this research, we're primarily working with two materials, opaque stoneware and translucent porcelain. So the stoneware is an opaque clay, but it's incredibly easy to work with. Like it's lovely to sculpt with or 3D print with. Porcelain, on the other hand, is a huge challenge to work with. It's a notoriously difficult material, highly unstable during 3D printing or even throwing. But it has this amazing ability to transmit light when you can get it to be thin enough. And so what you're actually seeing here is these two sets of images on the screen are actually the exact same digital file and parameters. What's yielding the difference is the two very different types of clay. So because we're working with two very different materials that react very differently with light and have very different working properties, the research outputs of this work are basically divided into two parts. With stoneware, we're trying to manipulate the direction of incident light through these porous multi-layered component sections. With porcelain, we're trying to modulate light as a function of extrusion variability. And all that means is essentially varying the wall thickness of the ceramic to either allow more or less light to pass through at different moments in the wall section. So in this project, we've come up with ways of categorizing this work in terms of how big the aperture sizes in the screens are. So going from small, medium, large to extra large. And in all these prints, what's happening is clay is being dropped into areas of the wall section where you have no material, where it's unsupported, and that either creates porosity or translucency. So in order to prevent structural collapse, you have to be kind of clever about how you move that tool path so you're not getting too much porosity or too much thickness. So the whole thing just doesn't flop over. So in this diagram on the screen, this essentially displays the kind of layer by layer deformation of each typology when it's mapped against the digital tool path. So you can see that in the small typology, deformation is taking place at the level of millimeters. In the extra large typology, deformation is actually taking place at the scale of centimeters. So they yield very different light scattering effects. The prototype that's being printed on the screen is part of the large typology, and it's a bit deceiving because when you look at it at first, you don't realize that the clay is actually deforming that much when you look at the exterior. But if you take a look at the interior, where the video is a bit more out of focus, you can see how much the clay coils are falling. So it's worth noting that with all of this work, we're a lot less focused on the way the overall forms of these things look, and much more focused on the deformation of the clay at the scale of the individual print coil. So the scale of the work is very, very high. So more often than not, not, this process results in failure. And part of the goal is to kind of push the plastic and structural limitations of this material. So like I was saying, the more porous or thin these things become, the better light qualities that you're going to get, but the more structurally unstable these things become. So this tends to happen when these things are too porous or too thin relative to their given size or shape. So I'm quickly going to go through the different light screen typologies, starting with the small, which for us ended up becoming a series of pendants. Okay. So in all of these typologies, it became super important for us to cut these sections of the screens to understand what's really going on with the behavior of the play, but also to communicate to other people how exactly these things are working. So the small typology is made up of that highly translucent porcelain. So you can see the section getting thinner and thicker. It's also worth noting that in all the section diagrams that I'm going to show you, these black dots that you're seeing here represent the location of where the machine originally dropped the clay. The outlines represent where the clay ended up after being printed, dried, and fired. So there's not that much happening in this one, but you'll see that movement shift quite a bit in the subsequent typologies. So in the small, the thinner the material is, the more light comes through, and that's what you're seeing in this diagram. In the medium, large, and extra large, the material is opaque. So in these screens, light doesn't transmit through the clay body. What's happening is because the material is opaque, light has to bounce through the wall section. And so you can see here that in the medium typology, the light screen is essentially divided into two parts, a back and a front. And in the back, this kind of creates a structural data line. In the front, these layers are actually what's modulating the light. So the further these front layers pull away from the back, the more porous the screen becomes, but also the more unstable this whole thing gets. The large typology is characterized by directional illumination, meaning that it's printed upside down about its intended orientation in the end to direct these apertures downwards so that you don't experience any glare when you're looking at the piece. I think the large typology actually best demonstrates this concept that you have to anticipate deformation when you're designing with this technology and with this material. So you can see that we designed the wall section in either these flat or these convex shapes, and the material collapses into these concave scoops. And finally, the extra large typology is kind of an amalgamation of many of these concepts. Like the small, it also uses extrusion variability and deposits less material at the top and a lot more material at the bottom to modulate light. But like the medium, the wall section is also split into two with the structural backbone at the back. And then at the front, you have these two light modulating layers to sag and allow less or more light to come through. What's really interesting in this typology is that the relationship between aperture size and brightness is actually non-linear. And so here you're seeing that if the apertures are too small, brightness and illumination decrease because not enough light is coming through the screen. If it's too large, the same thing happens. You get excess material kind of filling these cavities and obscuring the light from coming through. So these screens that you're seeing all kind of represent different stages of our working methodology in our studio practice, but we've also had some opportunities to test the kind of workability or scalability of these workflows in larger projects. And so this was a collaborative venture between a team of 6 people at the University of Waterloo School of Architecture and SDI Interior Design, where we fabricated a masonry screen for the Investment Management Corporation of Ontario. And it's a traditional masonry wall that's bonded using mortar and grout, and it divides their kind of main lobby or reception area from a space behind the screen that's their primary meeting room. And it consists of 175 unique 3D printed stoneware units. So here you can see 2 units in the system, one in its most open configuration and one in its most closed. And each unit sits in a very specific location in the wall to create this kind of gradient of porosity, but also to fit really well with its surrounding neighbors. The commission was initially conceived of as 1,600 unique masonry units that each formed one of these apertures. But as we kind of started to prototype and test the system, we realized that that was pretty inefficient in terms of time, labor, and materials. So we looked to designing something different in terms of our units that would allow us to aggregate several of these apertures together. So in the final wall, 4 of the original apertures are integrated into a single brick by eliminating all the excess mortar joints and reducing the double wall in between. So what this did for us in the end was it reduced the total amount of clay in the wall by 25%. It eliminated 50% of the mortar joints, and it reduced the amount of units in the system from 1,600 to 175, which we were pretty happy about. So this whole project required a lot of full-scale mock-ups and testing. This is a shot of the edge condition of the final wall. We thankfully didn't have to put this up ourselves. Of course, we did all the prototyping in-house, but we had a professional team of masons come in and install the final wall for us, and it looks super clean. So our biggest challenge with that particular project was the fitting of those units together. And so because every single unit in that system was unique, and because the walls were so thin, we got a lot of deformation in the clay that caused everything to warp and made all of the mortar joints irregular. So that was a huge challenge. So the next time that we had an opportunity to take on something like this, we wanted to explore what a mechanically bonded system would look like. And so a system that used no mortar and no grout. We wanted to see if we could be kind of smart about the design of our tool path, like we were in Hive, to aggregate as many units together. But we also wanted to incorporate our research that we were doing on sectional variability and light modulation grading height. And so our first prototype of this piece was also on display at the Canadian Clay Glass Gallery this summer. And it's a project called Static Shift. It's best experienced when you're viewing it in motion. So it consists of 15 hanging tiles that form this continuous quote-unquote moving grid system. The tiles are printed using this self-intersecting pattern, comprising of apertures that shift relative to where you're looking at them in the room. And so they create a light modulating effect similar to what's called a moire effect, which is the mechanical interference of light by superimposed networks of lines, giving you the notion that the whole piece is moving. And so the system is fit together using these super simple steel pins. So 2 units kind of overlap, and at their intersection point, you just insert this kind of very small steel dowel. And so this was a very interesting process for us in terms of figuring out how the drying and firing process impact deformation in the clay. So what we did was we essentially programmed all of these breaks in the prints at the location of the joints between units. We would then subtract material away manually, but we wouldn't throw away the offcuts. We would dry and fire everything together so that when the whole system came together in the end, everything would fit together perfectly. I think we often think of 3D printing as an end stage production process because we typically use it with mediums like plastics or even concrete. But the beauty of working with clay is that it's still malleable after the wet processing process. So we're currently working on the next iteration of this project that's going to be on display next January in 2025. Okay, so this is the last project I'll show you. I think it's a fun project because it reflects a much more digital analog hybrid working methodology when it comes to working with clay. And we've been making these large scale sculptural pieces that are intended to be domestic artifacts. And because our equipment is fairly limited in size, we can't actually produce these in one go. So what we have to do is actually produce these in fragments and then kind of sculpt them together manually and smooth these surfaces to yield this kind of nice smooth finish. This particular stoneware clay that we're working with is extremely unforgiving. So every trace of your hand or the tools on the clay when it's wet are going to be on the piece forever. So it's a real challenge to work with, but it's also leaving a very interesting trace and kind of clues as to how these pieces are made directly on the body of the pieces. Okay, so that almost wraps it up. I just want to say that the work, of course, has very much extended into the teaching and the courses that both myself and James have been doing at the University of Waterloo School of Architecture and the Architectural Association Visiting School. So the block week program here, we're going to be focused on creating ornaments and novel form languages by using clay 3D printing. So specifically focusing on how we can address the design of the tool path and the tendency of the material to deform during 3D printing. So we actually formerly taught another course that's very similar to the one we're going to be running this week during the pandemic. And needless to say, it was an extremely challenging experience to teach a course on making online because our students couldn't actually physically engage with the material. Many of them had never even touched clay before, so it was extremely challenging. But this course was sponsored by Autodesk, and they very generously helped us develop a tool to simulate the behavior of clay when 3D printing. So that's what you're seeing on screen. This is something that was produced with that simulation tool, and then this is the resulting physical print. And so for an online course, that became invaluable for us, for our students to get more quick feedback during the prototyping process. And so it yielded some fun results. The tool can't necessarily compute full structural collapse. It's a bit too slow for that. It would take days, but it's really, really good at computing these kind of micro deformations that happen in clay. So that's what you're seeing in these kind of pockets in the print. So yeah, as part of the block week seminar that we'll be teaching here, we'll be using this tool a little bit at the end of the week, but we're also going to be making some exciting physical prototypes. And with that, I'll leave it there. Thank you, guys.
So I don't know if we have a bit of time for questions, if anyone has some questions. Okay, maybe I'll leave this one on and take that.
Thanks, that was very interesting. I'm wondering if any of your research and work can be extrapolated to the larger scale architectural side.
I can just answer with this one. Yeah, absolutely. So I think our first foray into large scale work was the Hive project that I showed, where it was a project specifically for interior applications. I think the biggest challenge that we face with the scalability of our work, or maybe exterior applications for architectural ceramic assemblies, is that in our climate, freeze and thaw is a huge issue. And so you can see that these things are kind of super detailed and full of buckets. And so if water accumulates in any of those in a city like Calgary, the freeze thaw is gonna crack the ceramic pretty instantaneously. And so we would love to take on more work at larger scales. I think right now that's the sort of biggest limitation for us in terms of outdoor applications, but I think the work is absolutely very scalable.
Yes, thank you for that. It's very interesting, and I think the lesson that I learned, and I think all designers should learn, is that you demonstrated that making these things uses materials and tools in your mind to decide how those things are made. And it seems to me what you do and what needs to be done is that you understand and respect the material, and that you understand and respect the tool, and that allows you to do these things. And I guess it's interesting to me to see if you eventually or occasionally go beyond this and begin to think of how the tool may change and evolve. So that I'm not sure you can deal with the material. You're kind of stuck with some of these things, right? But I really appreciate that demonstration of how complete you really have to understand the materials and the tools that you use to make things. And architects ought to really understand that it's not just a matter of imagining a form. You got to understand how it's going to be made in a way that it's more than just form made. So
Yeah.
Thanks for that, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, to touch on your question, it was something that maybe didn't manifest itself so much in the presentation because it's something kind of highly technical to talk about, but I think nonetheless important. And so 3D printing is a tool that often employs something called a slicer, which is a piece of software that takes the geometry that you 3D model and breaks it up into a series of contours, and then alters those contours into a language that the 3D printer can then read. So what we're doing in our research, because slicers make everything very user-friendly, they also limit people's ability to engage with the tools. And so part of I focused very much on the kind of discussion around the challenges of the analog here, but the kind of physical side or digital side, excuse me, of what we do is eliminating the slicer and eliminating the kind of black box that creates between ourselves and the machine. So that's kind of the initial first step that we've taken to do what you're describing and kind of alter our relationship to the tools themselves. But in terms of reimagining how like the robot might change, I think that's a super interesting question. I mean, the DIY community around 3D printing is huge, and people make their own 3D printers all the time. And so right now, James and I are working with a commercially available machine, but because our work has become so specific in its scope and the things that we want to achieve, we feel that that's definitely part of our next steps.
Well, I will invite anyone who wants to ask and our Isabel question afterwards, just to. We'll be milling around here for a little bit. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. And to encourage you, if you want to see some of the stuff from Isabel and as workshops, we'll be exhibiting the student work here in this building and having a sort of wrap up party on Friday. And everyone's welcome to sort of come and check that out. So I want to again thank Anna and Isabel for their talks tonight and all of you for coming out. Thank you.